And now I'm going to begin our lesson on Chapter 15 and expand on the older adult and now look at the social aspect in their later life, the psychosocial, retirement, relationships, and societal issues. Through Chapter 15, we're going to explore what characterizes personality in older adulthood. What's the differences from the youth and middle age? How do older people really stay busy in retirement? What role does family play in their lives? And what are some of the social issues facing people in the later years of their life? So let's begin the lecture with theories of psychosocial aging. What does this mean? What are some of the social involvement and what is successful aging? What is the competence environmental press model? So let's think about this. What is aging? What does that mean to you? Aging is an individual process and it involves many variations across people. No two people age the same way. I know when I look at people in the hospital, I can have an 80-year-old that looks like they're 50, and I can have a 50-year-old that looks like they're 90, right? Everybody ages differently. Well, what factors into that? We're going to take a look at the psychosocial approaches to aging, and we're going to see what differences those play in. So let's begin with the question, what is successful aging? What is the key to living a full life in your older years? Researchers have found through evaluating older adults that there isn't one pathway to successful aging, but there are some key components that every successful pathway has, and that is a focus on positive outcomes through health and social engagement to achieve well-being. In other words, do they live a healthy life? And are they connected to their family and friends? Older adults that can change and adapt and still continue to have these healthy lifestyles will have the most successful pathway. So if you remember in Chapter 1, we talked about selective optimization with compensation model. That's what they're doing in these later lives. And remember what we talked about in Chapter 14, the changes as you get older, the physiological changes in vision and hearing, certain memory changes, all adults face. So if they can complete that selective optimization and learn to compensate for these physical changes, they're going to be most successful in living a full and productive life. So older adults continue to strive as much as possible if they can keep these compensation techniques alive. So we know the biggest part to successful aging involves those who are best at compensating and adapting to the physiological changes that come with aging, and those that have a positive outlook on social relationships and have a healthy lifestyle. But how do they do this? How do they cope with the changes in lifestyle as they age? We're going to look at some of those theories. The first one is a continuity theory. And what that means is that people tend to cope with their daily life and later in adulthood by applying familiar strategies based on past experiences to maintain and preserve both internal and external structures. So by building on and linking to one's past life, changes become, continuous. In this sense, the continuity represents an evolution. So they're not having a complete break with the past. They're just changing it. And research has shown that people in their late life typically continue to engage in activities similar to those that they did early in adulthood, such as their social and civic engagement, things they participated in their church, other types of social activities. And they found that additional evidence has also indicated that with this broad continuity of activities, people also struck out in some new directions. So as long as they're continuing the activities they've done throughout their whole life, adjusting it according to their lifestyle, they're not afraid to continue to learn and try new things. What an individual defines as successful late in life is influenced by so many factors. And perhaps the best approach is to aim for a harmonious aging, which grounds success in one's culture and reflects the fact that there is no one right way to age well. Right? So we're just looking at, can these adults continue to live a positive, healthy life where they're not only engaged socially, but they're engaged with their family and friends. And if they can do that, whatever that definition is for them would be considered successful aging. Can you see some of your adults in your life, the older adults, how some have engaged in successful aging and others haven't? And can you think of some of the causes that maybe why they weren't so successful? Another theory we're going to look at is the competence and environmental press theory, which I mentioned earlier. And it brings us all the way back to chapter 1. We're coming full circle. So to understand this theory, let's think about chapter 1, the biopsychosocial theory, and how that relates to the person and the environment. So to do that, we have to break it down. What is competence? Well, competence is the upper limit of a person's ability to function in 5 domains. So basically, it's what that person can do when they're at their best, the very best they can do. And the 5 domains include physical health, sensory perceptual skills, motor skills, cognitive skills, and ego strength. So physical health, how well take care of yourself, you have disease process. Sensory perceptual, your vision, your depth perception. Motor skills, how well you move, you walk, your reaction times. Cognitive skills, your memory, your reasoning, your thinking process, and your ego strength, how confident you are in who you are. The environmental press part of it refers to the physical, interpersonal, or social demands that the environment puts on the people. So we're going to take all those 5 domains and put them in a specific environment. How are you going to react? So let's think about it. So a physical demand might include having to walk up 3 flights of stairs to your apartment. If we're thinking of in the competence and environmental press theory, we're going to look at what would that do to if you were a 15-year-old, and what would that mean if you're an 80-year-old. An 80-year-old is going to have a lot more trouble, theoretically, getting up those stairs. That's a physical, what is their competence in physical health? And their personal demand might be including having to adjust your behavior patterns to different types of people. So your interaction with adults, children, think of all those components, right? You can't hear them, you can't understand them, they speak a different language, As an 80-year-old, compared to a 15-year-old. Social demands includes dealing with laws or customs that place certain expectations on people. So think about the different laws that might affect the 80-year-old. Maybe they can't drive anymore. Maybe the custom is for grandpa, to live with their live with their children when they get a certain age. Is that okay? How do they deal with that? So these aspects of the theory bring all that together, the biological, psychological, and social forces. And remember back from chapter 1, the main thing in that biopsychosocial theory is timing is everything. So all those components mean something, but when are they happening? It's different for a 15-year-old versus an 80-year-old. So how does that older adult compensate is going to be the key to their successful aging. If they're adept at compensating in their environment and can have good upper limits, that competence in those 5 domains, they're going to show successful aging. So think of those adults in your life, those older adults. How well are they compensating in these domains in different environments? So remember, competence and environmental press change throughout the lifespan. And we saw that. Depending on you're 15, 20, 30, 40, 80, 90, you're going to have different levels of competence and your environment will change. And how you react to the environment will change. Positive affect can result from many combinations of competence and environmental press. And we're going to go over that a little bit more on the next slide in figure 15.1. And the key is your adaptation level. When the press level is average for a particular level of competence, So boundaries are the zones of maximum performance potential and maximum comfort. So we're going to look at that figure and kind of go over that. So, when you're really, how well are you going to adapt to an environment when you're pressed in those maximum loads of performance? So we're going to look at that next in the next slide. So this is a graph of the competence and environmental press model. So you can see that both competence and environmental press changes throughout the lifespan. So a 5-year-old differs from a 65-year-old to an 85-year-old. And you can see similarly that the demands you put on by your environment changes as well as you age. So thus the competence environmental press framework reflects changes in our life cycle as well. So if you look at the figure, you can show that the two components are related. So low to high competence is represented at the vertical axis. So that's the up and down, that's the competence. And then you can see on the vertical, which is the environmental press, which is weak to strong. So you can see on this area that most important, the shaded areas show that adaptive behavior and positive affect, which is emotion. Positive affect is our emotion, and that can result from many combinations of competence and environmental press level. So if you look, you can see right in that middle zone of maximal comfort and how positive affect and adaptive behavior affect that. Adaptation level is the area where the press level is average for a particular level of competence. This is where behavior and affect are normal. Slight increases in press tend to improve performance. This is the area on the figure labeled the zone of maximum performance potential. So slight decreases in press create the zone of maximum comfort, in which people are able to live happily without worrying about environmental demands. And you can see that as well. So the combinations of competence and environmental press that fall within either of these two zones results in adaptive behavior and positive affect. So you can see that right in the middle, you're right in the middle of competence and environment, and that's that positive affect. As a person moves away from these areas, behavior becomes increasingly maladaptive. That means that they're not adapting to the situation, they're not compensating. So this the affects become negative. So that means that your emotions and the way that you compensate is not effective. And these can result from several combinations and for different reasons. For example, too many environmental demands on a person with low competence can have too few demands on a person with high competence. Both results in maladaptive behavior and negative affect. So if you think of your older adult, if they're living upstairs, they have decreased vision, poor balance, poor hearing, that's a lot of demands on them. No friends to check in on. It's a lot of environmental demands, and their competency is kind of low. I think of a really intelligent person that doesn't have a lot of friends or anything, but they don't have any stimulus. That can also cause a negative effect. So they have a lot of competence, as you can see on the graph over there on the left, but there's no environmental press, nothing to challenge them. So both extremes can cause maladaptive behavior. So the key is to keep that balance. Keep yourself competent in those levels and just have the right environmental press. So how do we do that? That's one of the key ways that needs to be answered to have successful aging. But this is a great model to look at how that affects and how that compensation with an environment affects that. And remember that each person has the potential of being well adapted to some type of living situations. You just have to match them with the correct competence and the correct environment. And when abilities match demands, people adapt. So when there's a mismatch, they don't. So that's when people tend to be less successful in their aging process. And understanding how people age, it usually entails a much broader perspective than any one theory can explain. So life is not simple, aging is not simple, and matching people to their environment with their skill is not simple. But trying to achieve the best match in their living situation with their competency is going to create the most successful aging. I want you right now to take a minute and think about the older adults in your life. What do you know about them? Do they seem themselves? Do they seem the same as they were from when they were in the past? Do they match up to stories that people told you from their youth? I want you to really think about those people, and as we go through this section on personality, social cognition, and spirituality, I want you to think of it through their eyes and see how it compares to what you knew of them as a younger person. So some of the things we're going to go over are integrity late in life. How do people achieve it? How well defined is adulthood? How do people actually view themselves as they age? Do they view themselves differently than when they were in their youth? And how does spirituality play later on in life? Let's take a look. As people enter the later part of their life, they begin to struggle a lot with integrity versus despair. And what that means is that how do people make sense of their lives? The process. So we're going to go back to Erickson, and according to him, the struggle comes about as older adults try to understand their lives in terms of the future and their family and community. So now they're looking at the future, which is a very short period of time, right? So they're looking at what is the integrity versus that despair. They begin to think of their own death, and they balance it with the realization that they will live on through their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the community. They're thinking about what is their life going to be, how is their life going to impact those after they die? What is going to be their legacy? So this realization produced what Erickson calls a life-affirming involvement. The struggle of integrity versus despair, it requires people to engage in a life review. So they're going to think about all the things that happen in their life, the good, the bad. And by this process, people begin to reflect on those events and experience of their life. To achieve integrity, a person must come to terms with the choices and events that they made, and that they're their own. They have to kind of own it and realize that it's their unique life pattern, and what does it mean now at this stage in their life. They're also going to have to come to an acceptance that their life is going to be coming to a close. Research has shown a connection between engaging in a life review, so that reflection of the events of their life, and in achieving integrity. So a life review forms a basis for effective mental health interventions. So to be mentally healthy, adults need to have that capability of reflecting on their lives and then accepting that one day, sooner than later, that they will not be here any longer. And what does that mean? So Erickson went on to ask the question, who reaches integrity? And he emphasized that people who demonstrate integrity have made many different choices and follow many different lifestyles. So there's not just one path. And he wants to point, the biggest point is that everyone has this opportunity to achieve integrity if they strive for it. So it's open, no matter who you are, woman, female, ethnicity, you can achieve integrity, you just have to strive for it. Those who reach integrity become self-affirming and self-accepting. They judge their lives to have been worthwhile and good. They are glad to have lived the lives that they have. So, in order to have that integrity, you have to have a lot of self-reflection. And this is key to having a successful aging. Those that don't have much more despair. So that's that stage of Erickson, integrity versus despair. So those that can't have that introspection are not going to have that self-examination and self-reflection, and they're going to have a possibility of more despair. And this is according to Erickson. So let's look at well-being and emotion. So basically, how is your life going? Are you reasonably content and happy? Do you think things could be better? Do you think things could be worse? How do you feel your life? How do you feel your life is going? So the answer to these questions helps provide insight into the well-being of the older adult and how they associate life and positive feelings. As they discovered in lifespan development psychology, subjective well-being is usually assessed by measures of life satisfaction, happiness, and self-esteem. So they found that well-being that's associated with positive feeling and emotion tends to increase with age. And we'll look at that a little bit more in figure 15.2 on the next slide. One of the reasons for this, they found in emotion-focused research through neuroscience. So that's that science supporting that psychological theory. And they asked the question why subjective well-being tends to increase with age. And what they found was that a brain structure called the amygdala, which is, remember, that almond-shaped set of nuclei deep in the brain that helps regulate emotion. They found that evidence is growing that age-related changes in how the amygdala functions may play a key role in understanding emotion regulations in older adults. So this is how they explained it. So in your younger adults, arousal of the amygdala is associated with negative emotional arousal. So when you have negative emotions, that amygdala is stimulated. So when negative emotion arousal occurs, for example, memory for events associated with emotions are stronger. So you may remember something back in your childhood that was sad or hurtful much more than something that was happy. But what they found is that the situation is actually opposite for older adults. When negative emotional arousal occurs, for example, so both amygdala activation and emotional arousal are lower for that older adults with negative feelings. That may be one reason why older adults experience less negative emotion, lower rates of depression, and better well-being, because they have that opposite effect when they experience that amygdala is stimulated. But that doesn't tell the whole story. Neuroimaging research continues to change in cognitive processing, and the prefrontal cortex has also shown associated with changes in emotional regulation in older adults. So actual brain chemistry affects our well-being and emotion, just like actual brain chemistry affected our feelings and emotion throughout teenage, middle adult, all that. So the changes in that can actually help us successfully age. So just remember that amygdala, when the negative response is triggered in the teenager, it has more memories. But as the adults, negative experience has lower activation of the amygdala, which gives them better coping and lower rates of depression and better well-being. So figure 15.2 shows that curve of well-being and emotion. So you can see that overall well-being across adulthood looks like a U-shaped function, almost like a crooked smile. Younger adults are characterized by improving subjective well-being compared with middle-aged adults, although the extent of the difference depends on several factors, right? Chronic illness, marital status, the quality of one's social network, stress, right? All those things in middle adulthood. Remember we talked about in earlier chapters why the middle adult compared to the earlier adults may not be as happy, and that they're having to take care of their children and possibly their parents as well, right? So many things happening there that might cause that well-being and positive emotion. The thing to remember here is that this holds true for any culture. Research has found that studies of Australian, German, Taiwanese, and Tanzanian older adults show similar predictors of successful aging. So no matter where you go, this curve is the same. So I want you to think about that person and you, whatever age group you are, and think of those teenagers. What life events would cause you to have, your well-being factor. Why do middle age have lower? Why are teenagers in the middle? And why are the older adults seem to have the best well-being and emotion? Is it environment? Is it brain chemistry? A little bit of both? What factors? Those are some of the things I want you to think about as you think about well-being and emotion. So I want you to go back to that older adult that you've been picturing through this lecture. I want you to think about, how does spirituality play in their life? Are they spiritual? If they are, how does that affect their emotional well-being? If they're not, how does that affect it? I want you to think about that person as we talk about how spirituality affects you later in life. So what I want you to think of is, when faced with a daily problem of living, how would an older adult cope? Well, according to research, older adults in many countries of many different backgrounds use their religious faith and spirituality as the basis for coping. More than they use their family. Are you still picturing that you're adult? Do you think that's true? For some older adults, and they found this especially in the African American households, a strong attachment to God is what they believe helps them deal with the challenges of life. They have found there is considerable evidence linking spirituality or religious-based coping and health in general. So the more that you're spiritual or have some kind of religious coping, the better your health is. So in general, the older adults who are more involved with and committed to their faith just have better physical and mental health than older adults who are not religious. Spirituality can also help improve psychological health. They found that older African Americans report that spirituality is an important part of their concept of successful aging. So we're always thinking about that successful aging. So the way they cope, right? That's one of the keys to successful aging, that positive look on life and health. So they found that spirituality is a major impact on that. So when asked to describe ways of dealing with a problem in life that affect physical and mental health, many people list coping strategies associated with spirituality. And of these, the most frequently used were placing trust in God, praying, and getting strength and help from God. So again, think of that older person you're envisioning. Does this hold true for them? What ways is it true, and what ways is it not? Like we said, not everybody represents the same successful path, and not everybody is completely the same. But I want you to picture that adult and think of, does this hold true for the people in your life? So I want you to continue to think about that older adult that you are picturing in your life, and think about how spirituality plays in their process of aging. And we're going to look at the spiritual support now. And what spiritual support is a type of coping strategy that includes seeking pastoral care, participating in organized and non-organized religious activities, and expressing faith in a God who cares for people. So they found in research that even when under high levels of stress, such as during critical illness or other major life trauma, people who rely on spiritual support report greater personal well-being. So why do you think that? Well, what I've found with my patients is that if we think about well-being and thinking about positive outcomes, we think if someone can let that go and just trust in the process, trusting that God is going to take care of them, then they're going to have less stress that can affect them physically and mentally, and people that believe and can let that go are going to more likely have better coping strategies, and that reflects physically as well. So I just found that it's a more positive outlook, and with more positive outlooks, have more positive outcomes. And these findings show that reliance on spiritual beliefs helps people focus their attention on parts of the problem that might not be under their control. So like I said, when they can let it go and just trust the process and not try to control it, it helps have a better emotional well-being. So again, remember that spirituality later in life, that African Americans in particular show a reliance on religion in times of stress. They have found in studies that spiritual support is a type of coping strategy and a very effective one. The research has shown that feelings of self-worth are lowest in older adults who have very little religious commitment. So research has shown that spiritual support is an effective coping strategy, and those that don't have it tend to have lower self-worth. So when people rely on spirituality to cope, how do they do it? So for older adults, what they found, they ask these questions. When you're turning your problems over to God and you're letting God have it, what does that mean? And they found that it usually includes a 3-step process. The first one being differentiating between what can be changed, focusing on parts of the problem that can be changed, and emotionally disconnecting from aspects of the problem that cannot be changed. So by doing that, they focus on the belief that God will provide the best outcome possible. So that's what they mean when they use spirituality as a coping strategy. They let the control go and they just trust in the process. So they've actually done studies on the brain to see how the brain reacts with this coping strategy. And what they found through neuroscience research was a connection between certain mindfulness practices and brain activity. So what that means is that they found evidence that people who have practiced meditation show positive structural changes in areas of the brain related to attention. And thus, neurological evidence indicates that there may be changes in brain activity and an actual brain structure associated with spiritual practices that help people cope. So, like I said, there are always new technology that's connecting the observation and psychological research to actual scientific brain activity research. So they're putting it that it actually has effects on the brain. So an example of this change in brain activity between a normal rested state and a mediated state would show that significant increase in activity during meditation. It's a kind of positive structural change has led some research to argue that meditation might offer a promise as a way to slow down and perhaps even prevent the brain changes that underlie brain diseases such as dementia. So by studying this, they're actually understanding, that we can change the brain by just how we think. So we don't have to give medicine all the time. We don't always have to change it. We actually, how we cope and that we deal with stress can actually change the structure of our brain and improve. So that's a great promise for people that have diseases of the brain, dementia type diseases. But it's still too early to tell, and that some of these possibilities that a practice done for centuries among all the major religions in one form or another. So be mindful that meditation or contemplation could prevent or reverse negative changes in the brain. Will definitely be a focus of future research. So although they've shown promise, research hasn't been conclusive, and there's just not enough research to show how much or what or why or this all occurs. But definitely it's going to be something to, as research goes on, something that they'll be studying to think. But wouldn't that be an awesome thing to be able to do that, to help control some of those disease processes in the brain? When you think of middle adulthood, what is the major identifier for you? Work, right? You want to work how many years? 30, 40 years? Right now, you guys are major identifiers, school possibly. And the goal of getting work? What happens when you don't work anymore? What does retirement look like? How satisfied are you retired in retirement? Are you able to do other types of employment, voluntary opportunities? we're going to take a look at what that life looks like. So, up until 1934, when a railroad union sponsored a bill promoting mandatory retirement, and 1935, when Social Security was inaugurated, most Americans could not consider retirement as a possibility. Can you believe that? Can you imagine working until you die? Crazy. Only since World War II has there been a substantial number of retired people in the United States. And with that, it's created a whole different economy and social programs, right? So I know I do, and I'm sure you do, take retirement for granted. That is expected. I already have a plan. I have a retirement plan. I have an idea of when I want to retire. But economic downturns have played a major disruptive effect on people's retirement decisions and plans. Think about the people retiring right now. Think of how unstable the economy is with this coronavirus. What a bad time to retire, right? Stocks and everything. So you never know what the economy is going to look like when you retire. How do we prepare for that? As of right now, there is a huge number of people over 65 still in the workforce because of these issues of retirement and not having enough to, continue to live if they retire. And as more people retire and take advantage of our longer lives that we established, right? We have a longer life expectancy. There's significant social challenges that arise. How do we fund retiree benefits? How do we view older adults that are very active? Do we put a cap on when they can retire? My dad retired from the fire department at age 55, and they really, really pressured him to retire. But he wasn't ready, 55, right? Still had a lot of life living. How did they determine when you're ready to retire? There's different organizations and many programs out there now to assist retiring people. The AARP launched its Life Reimagine tool to assist people in finding their path. So retirement is a hot button, right? Let's take a look a little bit more at this. So I wanted you to imagine yourself in 30, 40, 50 years. What is retirement going to look like for you? What do you hope to be doing when you're retired? Does it look the same for everybody? Probably not, just like successful aging isn't the same. So let's take a look. What does being retired mean? Well, retirement means different things, right, to different people. And especially since the beginning of the Great Recession in 2008, due to the abrupt change in people's planning and expectation through the loss of the savings or pensions. That's when the big recession happened, and then people lost their savings and their pension plans. Retirement has looked different to people, and people are thinking about that now, like we talked earlier in the slides. Part of the reason it's difficult to define retirement is because the decision to retire involves the loss of that identity, right? That what I was talking about earlier, that occupational identity. Who are you if you're not working? I mean, I've been a physical therapist for 20 years. Transitioning to being a professor, am I a professor or am I a physical therapist? What is that identity? Who you are. Work identity becomes ingrained in you. When you're no longer that, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that loss of yourself? It can be that loss of this aspect of themselves can be difficult to face. And some people look for a label other than retired to describe themselves. It's a really complex transition. Really hard because in most of your life you're working. Researchers view retirement as another of many transitions people experience in life. And this view makes retirement a complex process by which people withdraw from full-time participation in an occupation and recognizing, just like successful aging, that there are many pathways to this end. And we've got to recognize that by withdrawing from this, that they're going to, people are going to handle it differently. I know my dad, it was really, really hard because he was a fireman and he lived with these people, not just work, but actually lived with these people 48 hours at a time. I mean, stopping that abruptly is a hard transition. Got a little depressed. Had to find things to do in his retirement that challenged and took over that social aspect. So let's look a little bit more at What is retirement? So why do people retire? I knew when I was 20, I said I was going to retire at 40. And yet here I am still working. So why haven't I retired? Well, there's many reasons, right? So let's take a look at them. So let's just think. Most people choose to if they decide they will be financially stable. So you can't retire early. Like I can't retire early because I still need to work to pay my mortgage, put my daughter through school. I need to be more financially stable. So they may choose to work longer if you're not financially stable. You've got to look at also, you have to look at what your retirement is going to look like. What income will you have when you're retired? Are you able to get income from Social Security, pensions, other structured retirement programs, and personal savings? Most people, though, retire by choice and for any other reason. So remember that. Most people, it is a choice. But some people are forced to retire because of health problems or because they lose their jobs, right? Due to economic downturn. A lot of older employees are accepting buyout packages or they're let go because they're more expensive. Remember, we talked about that in another chapter about how the older generation, less likely maybe to adapt in the workforce, have less skills, and actually cost a lot more money than their younger counterpart, even though they have a lot of experience. They're trying to buy them out so these companies can save money. Others are permanently furloughed, laid off, or dismissed. So a lot of people are getting furloughed right now. So just think about this when you're like 60 and you maybe not be able to find another job. You don't want to be forced into retirement. The decision to retire is influenced by one's occupational history and goal expectations. So whether people perceive that they will achieve their personal goals through work or retirement influences the decision to retire and its connection also with health and disability. So you're balancing those goals and whether you can still achieve them, whether you're healthy enough to achieve them, or you have to quit. So many people retire because they just can't do the job anymore. They want to, but they just physically are unable to. So during the Great Recession, so that Great Recession of 2008, and that's when all that housing market, they have those, if you guys may be too young, but the housing market blew up. It was overinflated and a lot of people lost their homes, the mortgage. So during that Great Recession, many plans were made, and then it came down that many people lost their savings and pensions. So they had to work longer. They couldn't retire. Um, so that stocks plummeted, companies eliminated pension plans. So all that plays a huge, factor. Um, and most people have not saved anything close to what they will need in retirement. I mean, think about your bank account. I know I don't have in my bank account enough to retire if my 401k tanks. So what does that mean? How much savings do you need to be comfortable in retirement? So they've decided that a decent rule of thumb is to plan between 65 and 75% of your current income. That usually means having savings equal to 11 times your final salary, in addition to what you're going to get from your Social Security. So when you guys are young now, you're planning your 401k, I want you to think of that. When you get into your real job, you want to make sure that that it will have 11 times your final salary. And that might change because we don't know what Social Security is going to look like. But my best advice, put it in when you're young. Put it in and put as much in when you're young so that when you retire, you won't have to worry about this. Trust me. And you have to think, and they also, retirees have to think about medical expenses. So it's just not an easy decision. So the bottom line is that longer life expectancies have added to the amount of money people will need to retire, right? They're living a lot longer, so you've got to not just, you have to think, what if you live to 90 something? Do you have enough money? And usually the amount of money you need is usually greater than what you think. So start early. That's my best advice. The minute you can put anything into your retirement, put it in. So how do people go through the process of a retirement? How do they adjust to it? So the researchers have agreed on one point. New patterns of personal involvement must be developed in the context of changing rules and lifestyles in retirement. People's adjustment to a retirement, it evolves over time. as a result of complex interrelations involving health, physical health, right, financial status, the degree to which their retirement was voluntarily. Did they get to choose, right? Or they forced into retirement because of job loss or health or disability, and that feelings of personal control. So all those factors are going to determine how well you adjust to your retirement. So what has research shown? How do most people fare? So they found that as long as they have financial security, good health, a supportive network of relatives and friends, and they're internally driven to succeed, have a great sense of motivation, that most retirers report feeling very good about being retired. So that's a lot of stuff that has to happen, right? Not everybody has that security blanket. But if you do, you tend to feel pretty good about being retired. Who wouldn't, right? If you have your health and you have money, you can actually go do the things that you've always wanted to do. One widely held view is that being retired has negative effects on health, and that isn't necessarily true. Research has found that the relation between health and retirement is complex, right? There's very many different levels of retirement. There's successful retirement and maybe not so successful retirement. So there's no evidence that voluntary retirement has any immediate negative effects on health. But however, there is ample evidence that being forced to retire is correlated with significantly poor physical and mental health. So if you lose your job because you're fired, furloughed, economic reasons, or you have to retire because of your health, research does show that it correlates with poor physical and mental health, right? If you still wanted to keep working but you can't, you're probably going to be depressed, and you may be physically disabled, so you're having physical problems anyways, or because that depression or that sadness, you may not be as physical. So just remember that voluntary retirement has no negative effects on health, but forced retirement can have effects on your poor physical health and mental health. So health issues are also a major predictor on when a person retires, which they showed in a longitudinal study in England, which is looking at the same people over time. So that health issue is a major predictor of how people will retire. So just remember, retirement provides many people with the opportunity to do the things they want to do rather than the things they must do, like these people gardening. So it can be a time of great happiness if they transition well. So now let's look at the employment and volunteering possibilities for the retiree. So we determined early on, right, in the lecture that successful aging involves, positive health and positive social interaction. So retirees must maintain that social integration that they had in the workforce, and they need to be active in various ways. So the ability to adapt to new routines and patterns while maintaining social integration and being active in various ways is going to produce the most successful retirement. So they found that working in late life for an increasing number of people that are retired involves working at least part-time. So many people don't fully retire. They may just change. I remember when my grandpa retired from the oil business, he actually went and took a part-time job at Steyer's RV. So many will take maybe a less stressful, not as skill-heavy job, but they still need to work. They still need to have that environment to feel productive. And they may still need some finances. So employment for some is financial necessity, whereas for others it just represents a way to stay involved. So there's a trend for companies to employ older workers, especially on a part-time basis, and it's likely to continue because it's a good option for companies. And they found that not most, but a lot of retired individuals likely continue to include some aspect of employment well into late life. Volunteering is another way to stay involved. Active retired adults can maintain community ties by volunteering. And older people volunteer for several reasons. It helps develop new aspects of the self, helps them find a personal sense of purpose when they don't have that work purpose anymore. It fulfills that want to share one's skills and expertise, that mentorship. It redefines the nature and merits of volunteer work. It's making use of a more highly educated and healthy population of older adults. Remember, we have more adults living longer and more healthy adults living longer. And it takes advantage of the expanded opportunities for people to become involved in volunteer work that they enjoy. So it's a whole new area that these retirees can experience. So a particular study noted that women at the leading edge of baby boom generation are interested in volunteering for personal, rather purely altruistic reasons and do so on their own terms. They also show that research in New Zealand documents that older adults find their volunteering enables them to give back to their local communities. Whereas another research maintains that volunteerism offers a way for society to tap into the vast resources that older adults offer. So volunteering, remember when we talked about that generativity, right? That passing on or staying stagnant. So that volunteering is an example of that generativity, right? Passing on what they know to another generation. And for society to take advantage of their skills and their levels without having to pay them. So it's a win-win, right? So by doing that, they stay active, they stay social, they stay physically active again, and that's those keys, right, to successful aging. So we go back to that older adult in your life that you're picturing. Now I want you to think about friends and family. How do they play? How do you play a part in their life? How does that help them in their socio-emotional selectivity? How about ones that are married and same-sex partners? What is it like to provide basic care for another? What if you are married and you have your spouse is ill? And how do you cope when you become a widow? If you think about that person, if there's any of the things that these have affected them, and think of that person as we go and talk about this. Whether it is friendship or family ties, having relationships with others is what keeps people connected. And remember that positive connection is one of the key factors in successful aging. So we've seen through this class how our lives are shaped by others and how we share the company of others. So we're going to go over a little bit this term of social convoy, and what it suggests is how a group of people journey with us throughout our lives, providing support in good and bad times. Think about those people in your life. Who represents your social convoy? Does your parents have a social convoy? Is it different from when they were your age? Do you think you'll have the same social convoy when you become older? What they found is that the size of one's social convoy and the amount of support it provides does not differ across generations. Do you agree? They found that this strongly supports the conclusion that friends and family are essential aspects of all adults' lives. I think we can agree on that without your friends, without your family, going to college would be really hard, right? Same thing as when you're in adulthood, and very key when you're later in adulthood, because you're going to be needing a lot more help, kind of almost like going to the childhood, right? The older you get. So research has found some aspects on social support according to different cultural communities. They found that it's very important in the African American community, as these networks provide all sorts of informal assistance for health-related and other issues. They found that these social networks are especially important for older Mexican American and Filipino immigrants who are assisted by members of their network. Can you think of an example in your family or someone, a friend of a family? I know I had a friend whose family, they lived back in Providence, Rhode Island, and they lived actually in a 3-story apartment, with each level having one generation of the family. And the goal was so that they could take care of each other. Are you seeing that more often? Does your family do that? It's important to understand how these social convoys work and how they do differ depending on the cultural aspects. I want you to picture who your friends and your siblings right now. What kind of relationships do you have with them? Do they support you? Do you support them? Now take yourself 50 years from now. What would it look like? Do you have the same friends? Are your siblings close? We're going to take a look and see how friends and siblings are influential in the older adult relationships. So friends, siblings, and socio-emotional selectivity, older adults tend to have fewer relationships with people in general, and they tend to develop fewer new relationships compared with middle-aged and young adults. But older adults have the same need for friends as do people in younger generations. So why do you think that happens? Carson and colleagues have shown that the changes in social behavior seen in late life reflect a complicated but important process. So emotional regulation is the goal for older adults. They don't want a lot of change, right? There's a lot of change in their environment, so they want to be able to control their emotions, control how they feel. So people tend to become highly selective in their choice of social partners and usually prefer people who are familiar to them. Though fewer in number, the quality and purpose of late life friendships are particularly important in part because older adults do not want to become burdens to their families. So they're looking for those friends and that support so they don't have to. Having friends also provides a buffer against the loss of roles and status that accompany old age, and it can increase people's happiness and self-esteem. Right? So remember we talked about they're coming out of retirement, physical changes, they're not, you can't see as well, can't hear well, you're not able to do your job that you identified for years. So can you imagine not having any support and going through that? That sounds lonely and sad, right? How successful are you going to be with aging? But having friends who are going through that same aspect in their life, having that support, having an outlet, it's going to give those people greater happiness and greater self-esteem and give them greater successful aging. So we're going to look at a lifespan theory of socio-emotional selectivity. And it argues that social contact is motivated by a variety of goals, which include information seeking, self-concept, and emotional regulation. The relevance of each of these goals differs across the adult lifespan, and it results in very different social behaviors. For example, information seeking is the goal for young adults, so meeting many new people is an essential part of the process. But for older adults, this isn't true. They are looking for that familiar, remember? They want something, not necessarily making new relationships, that's harder. So friends that die are not replaced by people from younger generations. Another thing they found, though, is that older adults have recently been using online services for finding friends that may lead to dating situations, right? Think of all those dating apps. A huge service is for the older adults. What do you guys think about that? Do you think the older adults should be on those dating apps? Is it a great way for them to meet people without, having to seek out? How do they seek out new relationships? They may not physically be capable of going out. Where do they meet these things? So many have gone on to those online services. Something to ponder there. Siblings constitute the longest lasting relationship in most people's lives. They were there when you were born, and most likely they're going to be there pretty close to when you die. They found that relationships usually are more important in late life rather than in early adulthood. And they depend on several factors. Things like proximity, if you live in the same city, health, are you physically able to go visit and see each other, and the degree of relatedness, full, step, or half siblings. And they found that once if you're very, very close siblings, or once one is deceased, that they found that close bond can almost carry on that, where they see the surviving sibling talking as if the deceased sibling is alive, or reflecting a lot on their life, or actually talking to the deceased sibling for advice because they've had them in their life so long. They've also found that many siblings share that close relationship due to a long and shared past. And that's why many of the reasons why they may still show that talking to that deceased relative. But what they found that is very clear is that these sibling relationships in later life are affected by events in the lives of the siblings that may have occurred decades earlier. And that if there is no contact, so the opposite can be true too. If there's no contact between the siblings over the extended period of time, it is very unlikely that these that rifts in the relationship will be prepared. So it's all based on that continuity of your relationship. If you're close now, you probably tend to be close later on in life. If you have a rift, probably not going to repair it. Think about your relationships now. Where do you see yourself with your friends and siblings in 50 years? So siblings is one of your longest relationships, right? Another long relationship is marriage. How does that affect you in later adult life? What does that look like? So marriage and same-sex partnerships in late life has several benefits. So they did a study of over 9,000 European Americans, African Americans, and Latino Americans. And it showed that marriage helps people better deal with chronic illness, functional problems, and disabilities. And if you remember from chapter 13, marital satisfaction improves once the children leave the home and remains fairly high in older couples. So why do you think that? Many older couples exhibit selective memory regarding the occurrence of negative events and perceptions of their spouse, and they tend to report predominantly positive behaviors. So as time goes by, the bad things go away, and they just remember the good things. Do you find that true? Do you see that in older married couples? Older married couples have a reduced potential for conflict and greater potential for pleasure. And they're more likely to be similar in terms of mental and physical health and show fewer gender differences in sources of pleasure. In short, most older married couples have developed adaptive ways to avoid conflict. So why do you think that? Do you think over time they just have adapted to know each other really well? They know not to push their buttons? Do they forget, lovers think about being married 50, 60 years? You start to have a better perspective on life and you forget the petty things that don't matter. Have you ever met an older couple that I almost look alike? They always say, oh, you spend so much time together, you look alike. So it's that they start to become and meld as one in mentality and physical health. So what happens when one gets sick? One doesn't have that same mental or physical health capability. We're going to look at that a little bit later. So what we need to remember is that marriage in late life has many benefits. It helps people deal better with chronic illness, and the division of household chores becomes more equal. So just think of being 50, 60 years together. You're more likely to forget about the bad stuff. You're more likely to have an equal partnership helping each other out in the home. And you're going to help each other when you get sick. So definitely major benefits of marriage late in life. So what about same-sex partnerships? Do they represent these same benefits? Well, very little research has been conducted on long-term gay and lesbian partnerships. But based on the available data, it appears that such relationships do not differ in quality from long-term heterosexual marriages, nor are their concerns of the individuals different. So any type of long-term relationship is going to have those same benefits, whether you're same-sex or heterosexual. So imagine yourself on your wedding day when you're pledging to yourself in sickness and in health. You're in your 20s, you're in your 30s. What does that mean to you then? Now fast forward 50, 60 years, and you're now caring for your chronically ill partner. Is it the same as what you imagine? What does that mean? Do you think you'll be able to do it? Let's take a look at the challenges of caring for that chronically ill partner. So caring for a chronically ill partner is very different than caring for a chronically ill parent. So you may remember we talked about this, you may have been caring for your parent at this stage, but your role is definitely different when it becomes your partner. The partner caregiver assumes the new role after decades of shared responsibility. Such change inevitably puts stress on the relationship, right? Instead of partners now, one is acting more like a parent, right? Studies have shown that partner caregivers of persons with Alzheimer's disease show that satisfaction with a relationship is much lower than for healthy couples. But partner caregivers also report more rewards compared with adult child caregivers. Marital satisfaction is also an important predictor of spousal caregivers' reports of depressive symptoms. That makes sense, right? The better that your relationship started as, the less likely you're going to be depressed. A finding holds that across the European American and African American spousal caregivers, that most partner caregivers adopt the caregiver role out of necessity, and that interventions that help improve the functional level of the ill partner generally improve the caregiving partner situation. So I find that a real key with this is that caregivers need to take care of themselves. They need to stay healthy. They need to find outlets to promote their mental health and understand the changing rules of their relationship. By doing that, they can have a healthier and better relationship with their partner, and with it, they can get better rewards. I can see that as a fact that's almost been harder on my mom, having been the caregiver for my adult dad with early Alzheimer's, because she has to deal with it every day and see that partner change from that strong personality to someone who needs help but doesn't want help, right? So taking care of that partner, not just the chronically ill, but the actual caregiver partner, is key. And it helps with maintain that marital satisfaction. And again, that partner caregiver reports more losses of intimacy, right? But more rewards than adult children caregivers. So remember that. So imagine being married for 67 years, and then your partner dies. You were married at 18. How would you feel? How would that affect your sense of life purpose? What does your life look like now? Do you know someone that's happened to? I can tell you my grandfather lost my grandmother after they'd been married 67 years. He just could not understand why that happened. That loss, that gap, definitely played a big role in his life. What does that look like? Let's take a look at what widowhood and later adulthood looks like. So for most people, the death of a partner is one of the most traumatic events they will ever experience. It causes an increased risk of death among older European Americans, but not African Americans, and an effect that lasts for several years. So many times you've probably seen the news where one spouse dies and then not too long after the other spouse dies. They just can't live without them. And yet, despite the stress of losing one's partner, most older adults manage to cope reasonably well. Why do you think that? Interesting. I remember my grandfather, we thought, oh no, he's not going to, be able to survive without us. But actually his will to live became super, super strong, much more so than when she was alive, and he lived 7 more years. I guess that coping and that death, sometimes staring death in the face, they realize they're not quite ready. Whereas other people are so emotionally, distraught that they follow suit and die right after them. But research has shown that most widowed adults manage to cope reasonably well. Women are more likely to be widowed than men, and that makes sense because women live longer. We studied that earlier. More than half of all women over age 65 are widows. That's crazy, right? But only 15% of men the same age are widowers. The reason for this discrepancy, remember we talked about this in chapter 14, is that biological and social forces. Remember, men tend to die in 12 of the leading 15 causes of death more than women. But one of the major factors in widowhood, which you can expect, what do you think? You no longer have your spouse. It's been 67 years. It's that loneliness, right? Can you imagine being with someone that long and then they're suddenly gone? They spend more time with that person than they've been alone. So loneliness is a major problem. Widowed people may be left alone by families and friends who do not know how to deal with a bereaved person, right? Sometimes the support that they have there just doesn't know what to say. They don't know how to deal with them, and many times maybe they might even avoid it. So as a result, widows and widowers may lose not only a partner, but also those friends and family who feel uncomfortable, including a single person rather than a couple in social events, right? So feelings of loss do not dissipate quickly. So they may go on for an extended amount of time, and people just do not know how to deal with it. How do you think you would deal being a widow? How do you think you would treat someone that is a widow? Think about their loneliness. Think about how they're feeling. Is there some things that you could do differently knowing this? Women and men experience widowhood differently, and this is to be expected. Just thinking about what we've learned over the semester, how women and girls and boys and men develop, how we form our social relationships, how we form our friendships. So of course we're going to experience widowhood differently. So they found those that are more dependent on the deceased partner report higher increases in self-esteem because they had to learn the task formerly done by their partner. So they actually had to learn how to do things that they never could do before. So they're actually feeling, better about themselves because they're actually learning a new skill. Men tend to recover more slowly since they may not have a strong social support system, right? We learned that. Women tend to be more social, so maybe men had their socialization through their wife, and now that their wife's not there, they don't have that same social support system, and they don't know how to go out and make that. So they may recover more slowly. And women experience more financial troubles. They may have a significant decline in income after their spouse's death. Predominantly many widowers now, if you think about who worked, over the last 50, 60 years, men, and they may have pensions, and they may lose their pensions or part of their pensions because their husbands have died, and in return having more financial troubles. Now this might be different 50, 60 years from now with more women working and having their own pension. We'll have to see what the studies show, but right now that's the trend because work lifestyles were different for the last 50, 60 years. And also another trend is that, right, some widowed adults cohabit or remarry for reasons such as need for companionship. I can tell you that I know many older adults that, and maybe I see this more trend in men but they seem to latch on to a woman to take care of them because they need that daily, reassurance. They need someone to cook for them. That was what they were grown up with. That was what their marriage was. So they tend to remarry or cohabitate for those reasons. Different than maybe for love, more for companionship or just that routine or to be taken care of. Now, we'll have to see what happens in, 50, 60 years as the dynamic of relationships have changed. But a lot of that was from, being raised in the 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And that's what was expected. So I have seen that trend. What have you guys seen? Do you see a lot of widows cohabitating or remarrying for reasons of companionship or financial security? A lot of those things to consider, right? But some of that partnering, or that cohabitation in widowhood can be difficult due to family objections. I know many families feel that they don't want someone to replace their mom or their dad, so that resistance from children. objective limitations, so they have decreased mobility, poor health, poor finances, and absence of incentives common to younger age. They don't need to have children, and social pressures to protect one's estate, so they don't give all their finances to this new woman instead of to their family. So lots of things to think about in widowhood. What have you seen? What are your thoughts on it? Widowers need a strong social support system to adapt to their loss. So don't forget, if you know a widow or if someone's going through that time, a death, remember, even though they say they may not need help, loneliness is the biggest, one of the biggest factors that they'll be facing right now. So be kind. So now let's think about the social issues and aging. So what do you picture an older adult? What do you picture an 80-year-old, 90-year-old, 70-year-old? What do they look like? Are they frail? Are they happy? What constitutes a frail older adult? Can they live by themselves? Are they abused or neglected? What are the key social policies? Think about the social policies affecting you. You're thinking about school, your children, finding jobs. Now you're 80 or 90. What are your key social policies affecting you now? Are they the same? What's different? We're going to take a look at that. I want you to picture a frail older adult. What does that look like to you? Are they stooped over? Can they comb their hair, brush their teeth? Do they use a walker or a cane? Can they even walk? Can they get out of bed? Do they remember their name? Can they do their finances? Can they live alone? Let's look at what constitutes that frail older adult. So a frail older adult is one that faces significant physical or mental challenges. They have physical disabilities, are very ill, and may have cognitive or psychological disorders. Although these frail older adults constitute a minority of the population over age 65, it is a proportion that increases with age, right? The older you get, eventually, you have a higher potential to become frail. Now, when we think about frail older adults, let's look back at that competence environmental press model. Remember? So these are people whose competence is declining, right? They can't see very well, walk very well. They don't have, their skills are declining. So what does that mean when you put them in their home environment? Can they still thrive? Or are they going to be, can they still adapt? Or is that a negative adaptation? Do we have to look at other options? So when looking at frail adults, there's not one specific problem that differentiates them from their active, healthy counterparts. Instead, it's the total picture. They tend to have multiple problems. So consider the rise of older adults in the general population. The number of people who could fit in this category is significantly increasing. So how do we assess who a frail adult is? We need to assess their everyday competence. And what that means is we need to look at their activities of daily living, which is ADLs. And I look at that every time I see a patient. Now, as a physical therapist, I'm going to look at more gross motor, can they walk, balance, and stuff. But ADLs are mostly looked at by occupational therapists, but physical therapists play a role as well. And what they're looking at are basic self-care tasks. Can they feed themselves? Can they bathe? Can they toilet? And toileting means can they walk there, wipe their bottom, dispose, wash their hands? Can they dress themselves? Can they brush their teeth? So can they take care of themselves? Those basic skills. And a person could be considered frail if they need help with one of these tasks. So when you're looking at that, think about that older person in there, that picture you had at the beginning. Can that person do those basic self-care tasks? Are they independent in activities of daily living, or do they need help and may be in that frail older population? Another instrument we look at is, so we looked at their activities of daily living, their basic skills. Now we're going to look at a higher level skill, which we call instrumental activities of daily living, or IADL. And these actions are ones that require some intellectual competence and planning. So that could be, can you balance a checkbook? Can you make a telephone call? Can you do your shopping? Can you make a shopping list? Can you take your medications on time? Can you keep appointments? So it's that higher level thinking. And some people can do their ADLs and just need help on their IADL. So determining where they are on both those scales is going to let us know how much help they need for living. Can they live by themselves? Do they need to live at a facility? What facility do they need to? Can they live at home with help? So we're always looking at therapists play a huge part in that. Even nursing does too. If you become, if you go into nursing and you end up being a case manager, or if anybody's a social worker, and you work in the hospital, you're going to be looking at those things to help make the decision on where does a person go once they leave the hospital. They find that this IADL is different from culture to culture. Why do you think? As we discovered earlier in the semester, right, each culture values different things in life. So what one culture values as important may not be important to another one. So you need to really inquire, what are the IADLs for that patient? What is important when they go home that they be able to do? So what are some examples that we talked about of IADLs in Western society? Exactly. We thought the ones that we said, taking medications, keeping appointments. So think about what are some examples in other cultures. So they found maybe across the world, some IADLs might be, can they take care of their animal herds? They might be sheep farmers. Can they make bread? Can they thresh grain, tend crops? So it just depends on what culturally is important and what they need to do in their everyday lives, taking care of themselves personally and those higher intellectual thoughts. So this figure shows the percent of persons with limitations in activities of daily living by age group. And basically, it's a good representation of what occupational therapists and physical therapists do in nursing homes, hospitals, rehab. So we're looking, occupational therapists are looking at bathing and showering, dressing, eating, using the toilet. Physical therapists are looking at getting in and out of bed, chairs, walking, not only the level, but the quality. So you can see how many, the percentage of people that have limitations by age group. So you can see that it definitely goes up as you get older, 85 years and over. So you look at the walking, 46% need help with walking over 85. So you can imagine, I say pretty good business, right? But just the trends on what is the most prevalent. So most people have difficulty walking. So just imagine if you're living as an older adult, if you have half of the people over 85 have difficulty walking, where can you live? Where can you get the help you need? If you can't eat, 6%, that's lower, but dressing, bathing, and showering, if you 24% of them aren't doing that, what kind of health are they maintaining? What kind of lifestyle? So these are very important in assessing that frail adult and thinking about, we're going to talk about a little bit later, what happens to these people as they age? Where can they live? Where can they get that support? So let's think about those housing options we were talking about. What happens to these frail adults when they're unable to take care of themselves, when they need help with those ADLs? So the key to providing a supportive context for frail adults is to create an optimal match between the person's competence and the environmental demand. So that's that competency environmental press theory. But what you're looking at, how do we look at competence? So we're looking at those ADLs. You're having the therapist. That's where my job would come in, to give you recommendations. How much assist do they need? What do they going to need when they go home? And then maybe as a nurse or a social worker or even, different areas of the healthcare field, you're going to help make those decisions on where should the person be, where's going to be their ideal housing situation. So housing options have stable homes, offer a place where things are familiar and services are nearby. So you're going to look at, and you're also going to look at a way to include the person's sense of identity. So you want to design and locate a house that supports the services that of those ages. So you want to be in an area where they can get to services easily, that you have people that can help. So they have a lot of different options. Living independently would be one option, right? So as most older adults do, they provide a measure of one's ability to provide self-care, right? So they have to be able to take care of themselves. And they want to keep them rooted in the attachment to their home. So many older people don't want to leave. I know my grandfather did not want to leave his home. He threatened us not to leave his home. So how do we keep them in their home, right? So many times that you may have to get home health, someone in there to come help them with their ADLs, their bathing, their showering, but maybe during the day they can stay by themselves. Maybe they're just not able to shower or cook for them, or maybe they just need their meals done. So maybe you can keep them in their home, but just provide services, home health aides, that can help with just what they need. That can be an option. Sometimes they have people that stay all day and they just sleep at night. There's nobody there. So there's lots of options that can help them keep them in their home. So they found that most older adults do whatever they can to adapt their homes and activities to accommodate the change that occurs with age. And aging in place provides a sense of self-determination and independence, even if assistance is needed to achieve those outcomes. So many people will try to stay in their home as long as they can and just get services that provide that little extra help so they can do that. And about half of adults over age 55 who thought it likely that they would need to move in with family or friends said they would not like this arrangement. So most people want to stay home. So there are a lot of services out there that can help that, but when that's not a possibility, what do we do? One way that older adults can age in place in their home is to renovate their home to accommodate wheelchairs. So many times they'll put in ramps, they'll take out stairs, put in grab bars in the showers, raise toilet seats, commodes next to the bed, use walkers, walking aids, wheelchairs, a lot of adaptive equipment that therapists can give the recommendations, so that person can go home and stay home for as long as they possibly can, because that is what most people want to do. So they are finding that there may be a significant increase in the number of homeless older adults. What they found is that mental health and substance abuse problems are higher in homeless individuals. We've seen that around Bakersfield, right? And that the lack of adequate support systems and services, coupled with the increased number of people age 65 and older, is raising concern that there may be a significant increase in the number of homeless older adults. So what that means is that because there is a general older population of 65, and we see with that larger population, there's still going to be mental and substance abuse problems. So there's going to be a more prevalent homeless older adult as a result. So something to think about. We do see a lot of homeless patients in the hospital, and they definitely have medical problems, a lot of wounds, a lot of stuff on their, wound care. A lot of times we have to discharge them to shelters or to the street. So something to think about. What are we going to do with this homeless older adult population that can't take care of themselves? Moving on, we're going to think about those housing arrangements now for those frail people. So once they cannot take care of themselves at home, they can't use the support of maybe that they just don't feel safe using home health anymore, what do you do? So the best housing arrangement for an older adult depends on their functional level, their functional health. So that's where therapists play a role, nurses play a role, social workers play a role. But my job as a therapist is to let you know, assess them and tell you what their levels are, and is to get them as independent as possible. So let's look at some of those housing arrangements. What do they mean? So if I'm going to assess their ADLs and IADLs, and then I'm going to come up with a plan or a recommendation of what that person needs once they leave. So if their functional health and their ADLs decrease, I'm going to have to recommend another type of optimal health situation. Let's take a closer look at each of the major types of housing to see how it works. First, we'll look at independent living situations. So this is taking your home and your house and making it into a home. A common way of achieving this is through home modifications. You can range from minor changes, changing doorknobs on cabinets, and making them pull handles so they're more easily grasped, to widening doorways so wheelchairs can fit in, bathrooms to provide access, for wheelchairs, grab bars, all those adaptations to the home, to the house, so they can stay in their home. Maybe having a home aide come in, helping with their ADLs, and it creates that sense of attachment, right? They still feel independent. They still have that huge psychological benefit of being in their home. And it gives them that cognitive and emotional attachment to the residence. So again, it's that independent living. Most people, like we said earlier, want to stay in their home. And if they can make their house more a home that fits their abilities now, they're going to feel that attachment and have a better psychological outcome. Next, let's look at an assisted living facility. That would be a next step, that once you couldn't live in your home, or maybe you're too afraid to or couldn't afford in-home support, you're going to look at assisted living facilities. And what they are is a supportive living arrangement for people who need assistance with ADLs or IADLs, but who are not so impaired that they need 24-hour care. Assisted livings actually have different levels. You could be actually living like an independent living, or maybe you couldn't cook for yourself, or but you don't need help with getting dressed and stuff. So you could actually live in the independent part, and you just walk down to the dining hall for food and social interaction and stuff. And then there's different parts in the assisted living. So you may have where you need help with your medications, that IADLs, or you might need just some help with the ADL. The different tiers in the assisted living facilities cost different money, and there is a plan that if you do need more care, there are services available. So it's a good option for those people as they get older to have that support to the level of what they need. So that competency and environmental prosperity, right? It can allow you to keep as much competency as you can, but again, be it safe and control that environment. So like I said, healthcare personnel assist with medications and other procedures as needed. So depending on the level that you are in the assisted living. And like I said, as residents become frailer, their needs may not be met at the facility. So if they become so frail that they are not able to stay there like overnight, because there's not usually anybody there overnight, or they fallen, or they're so sick that they need nursing care, or they've lost their independence that they need so much constant care that they're going to have to look to the next step, and that would be long-term care. So a lot of assisted living facilities have some long-term care facility in them. One here in Bakersfield would be Brookdale. They have actual assisted living, and then they have a nursing home aspect as well. We're going to look at that next step. But assisted living is not the same as long-term care or skilled nursing facility. Assisted living can start at pretty independent to different tiers depending on what you need help with your ADLs. So a nursing home would be considered a long-term care facility. And it provides medical care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it has a variety of healthcare professionals. It includes physicians who check on the patients and who can be on call, nurses, therapists, so physical, occupational, and speech. Sometimes they have recreational therapists. They have activity directors that engage the residents in activities to create that social interaction that we know is so important in aging. And there's different levels, again, in long-term care facilities. There's people that are bedbound to people that are walking around maybe with memory issues. So long-term care facilities just means you need some kind of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week help. And it can be for different mental or physical conditions. Now, within skilled nursing facilities, they have what's called like a short-term stay, and they usually have beds set aside. And those are for a lot of the patients that they don't determine to need to be there long-term, but may need some kind of therapy. So a lot of times they need speech or physical or occupational therapy, and they don't qualify or can't tolerate a rehab setting that would require 3 hours of therapy. They would come to the short-term part of a skilled nursing facility, and they would get therapy for an hour and a half a day, 5 days a week, till they could get stronger and hopefully go home. Some of those patients may turn into long-term care, but most nursing homes or skilled nursing facilities will have that short-term aspect. So when you're going into these facilities, know that not everybody is a resident there. There are many that they have set aside just for therapy and short-term stay so that they can transition home. So what they found is that there are 5% of older adults who live in long-term care facilities. Average residents are very old females, European American, with a 50-50 chance of having dementia, depression, or both. And there are many misconceptions of nursing homes. One of them I told you is that not all of them are long-term residents. So the typical nursing home patient is currently over 85 years old, is a female, is of European American descent, has 50-50 chance of dementia, depression, or both. So making the decision to go into long-term care into a nursing home is a hard decision that needs to be made by their partners, the patient, and family members. And it usually consults medical and spiritual advisors. So many times if you're a nurse, you're going to be playing a part in the decision for discharge from the hospital. You may be a nurse in a skilled nursing facility, totally different type of nurse, and social worker, or even your family members. So something to really understand what the nursing home means. So this graph shows the percentage of Medicare enrollees at age 65 and over residing in selected residential settings by age group. And as you can see, the percentage of older adults enrolled in Medicare who live in a long-term care facility at any given point in time increases from 2% in those aged 65 to 74 to about 14% of adults over age 85. So picture yourself, you want to find your grandparent, this awesome nursing home. You know they're going to have to live there. You cannot take care of them any longer. How do you decide which nursing home to put them in? Do you even have a choice? So at the hospital, a lot of times it's determined on what your insurance will cover, what places they have on their list, what's the availability. So a lot of times you'll be given maybe 3 to choose from. How do you make that decision? What's important to look at? We're going to look at that. So selecting a nursing home should be done very carefully. So among the most important things to consider are the quality of life for residents. So whether residents are well groomed, the food is tasty, and rooms contain comfortable furniture. You want to look at quality of care. You want to see whether the staff members respond quickly to calls, whether staff and family are involved in care decisions. And finally, you want to look at safety. You want to know whether there are enough staff members. Can they respond to calls quickly? Is the hallways free of clutter and other issues? Do they have outdoor areas available for the residents to use? Do they have social activities? What is their policy, on all these things? These aspects of nursing home reflects the dimensions that states consider in their inspections and licensing process. So when you go into a nursing home, they have a grade. So you want a high grade. So if they have a 2 or a 3, you want to question that. Why do they have that? You can look on the state board and look at some of their infractions. My best advice, and this is what I give to my patients, and as you're thinking of a healthcare career or your family member, you want to drop into these facilities. You do not want to make an appointment. You want to come in when they're not prepared to see you. You want to see them on a typical day. What does it look like when you come in? Is it clean? Are residents sitting in the halls? Is anybody paying attention to them? Are they having activities for them, or are they all in their rooms? You want to take a peek and see what a normal day activity looks like. Surprise them. Talk to some of the other family members there. See if it's clean. That's my best advice. And look at different facilities and make the best decision for your family member or your patient. So there's an emerging housing arrangement in response to the need to provide support for older adults, because we know that population is growing and going to continue to grow. And this new housing arrangement are looking at the required assistance with ADLs and IADLs who desire to age in a place with new options that provide both help and socialization. These movements include programs that infuse a different culture into nursing homes, as well as approaches that create small-scale living arrangements, usually 6 to 10 residents. So I've seen those in some individualized homes. They have those in Bakersfield. They're community-based settings with emphasis on living well rather than receiving care. Almost become like a family in there, right? One of the things that they found is called the Eden Alternative, and it seeks to eliminate loneliness, helplessness, and boredom from the lives of those living in long-term care facilities. And this program creates a community in which life is worth living. It can be achieved by rethinking how care is provided in the older person's own home or in long-term care facilities through training. Another one is the Greenhouse Project, which creates small neighborhoods and integrated homes for 6 to 10 residents in which older adults receive a high level of personal and professional care. The Greenhouse Project takes the principles of the Eden Alternative and creates a different culture of care in the community. So we do have those in Bakersfield. Again, they're smaller patients, have their own rooms. You still have the care that you give, but like I said, it's in a home, so it's less sterile and hospital-like, and the residents get to know each other, and it's very individualized. Another one is the Pioneer Network, which focuses on changing the culture of aging in America, regardless of where an older adult lives. So like the Eden Alternative, this approach focuses on respecting older adults and providing maximally supportive environments for them. So they emphasize as part of the larger culture in caring for these older adults, advocates for a major emphasis on making nursing homes more like home. So they want to change that sterile environment of a nursing home and making it more like a home. So various co-housing and cluster housing options provide another alternative approach. Co-housing is a planned community of modest size and is built around an open, walkable space designed to foster social interaction among neighbors. So remember when we talked about successful aging, you need that social interaction as a key component. So neighbors provide care for each other when needed. Personal autonomy is a core value for these people who create co-housing development. So it's those people that, they don't need tons of care, and maybe a neighbor helping a neighbor stay so they can stay independent longer. Not everybody is appropriate for that, obviously. That cluster housing combines the aging in place philosophy with supportive services. So it's trying to take your neighbors and to create that support and then get the in-home help that you need so you can stay in your home for as long as you can. So all these alternatives to traditional housing options for older adults indicates that the choices for how one spends their life is becoming more varied, which is great because I've been in nursing homes and some are good and some are bad. And the more options that you can that closely mimic your home, the better and more happy you're going to be. And it's very important alternatives with the surge in baby boom generation retiring and needing more care because our support services are going to be maxed out. And it's also a great opportunity for us healthcare workers, a lot more opportunity for different places to work. And if you're creative and innovative, you can think of all the areas that you may want to work. So what they found is that with all these, that we need to see what the research says and maybe focus some of that research on documenting the types of advantages that these alternatives offer and their effectiveness, because if they can prove that, more insurances are going to pay for it. And if more insurances pay for it, then this is going to allow more adults to have access to this. So without the research, insurances are less likely to pay for these alternative survival. So we need to find that, again, going back to that competent environmental press framework. Can we keep those competencies and match them to their environment? And can we keep them in those areas for as long as they're thriving so that they can age longer and age more successfully? Let's now look at that aging older adult that's maybe living alone, maybe living with a family member, a neighbor. Are they getting the care that they need? Are they being neglected? Is someone taking advantage of their finances? Has someone abandoned them? Let's look at the 7 categories of elder abuse and what that means for that aging older population. So we talked a little bit about elder abuse and neglect, like I said earlier, and it's very similar to like child abuse, which we talked about in chapter 7, and partner abuse in chapter 11. Elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation are really difficult to define precisely. But as a healthcare member, you are a mandated reporter. So if someone comes into the hospital or you see someone that you suspect elder abuse, you have a responsibility to contact your supervisor, who will delve deeper into it, to contact authorities. Just like you're mandated to report abuse in children. So what is the best way we can kind of clarify someone who's experiencing elder abuse or neglect? So let's look at these 7 categories. Physical abuse. That would constitute a use of physical force that may result in bodily injury, physical pain, or impairment. So actually hurting the patient. Hitting, pushing them down, pulling on them, causing bruises, stuff like that. Physically hurting them. Sexual abuse is non-consensual sexual contact of any kind. Emotional or psychological abuse could be infliction of anguish, pain, or distress, just like any type of yelling, screaming, fear, blackmailing, all those types of things. Financial or material exploitation. So you see this a lot in elderly. Maybe a caregiver, a friend, a family member comes in and takes over the finances, is withholding food, stealing their money. So basically illegal or improper use of an older adult's funds, properties, or assets. You see that the elder person has assets, but they come in malnourished, house is a mess. Why? Because the person who's taking care of them is stealing from them. Another one is abandonment, which is desertion of an older adult by an individual who had physical custody or otherwise had assumed responsibility for providing care for the older adult. So that's just basically you're leaving them. You were supposed to take care of them, and you just completely abandon them. Opposed to neglect, which is refusal or failure to fulfill any part of a person's obligation or duties to an older adult. Maybe you leave them in their urine. You don't feed them you feed them only breakfast. You're there, but you're not really taking care of them. You're neglecting them. And self-neglect, behaviors of an older person that threatens his or health or safety, excluding. So you're going to think about they're not able to do their ADLs anymore. They're not able to take care of themselves. So maybe they shouldn't be in the home. So those are some of the things that you want to look at when thinking about elder abuse. Another thing with self-neglect is you want to think of, are they still fostering those social interactions among their neighbors, or are they self-isolating? Personal autonomy is a core value for people who create co-housing developments. So if they're not interacting with their neighbors, that might be a sign of self-neglect. So research estimates that perhaps 1 in 4 vulnerable older adults are at risk for some type of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, with neglect being the most common type. And unfortunately, only a small proportion are reported to authorities. So again, if you are a healthcare member, you have to, we're a mandated reporter. So you need to really be able to understand what elder abuse is. Elder abuse is often noted by physicians first, either through routine examinations or in emergency departments and hospitals. So like myself, who works in a hospital, we often see that because they get so sick and frail that they have to be taken to the hospital. So we will see those signs of neglect. Current approaches to elder abuse, especially by adult children, which we see a lot, is that the caregiving situation isn't ideal. Similarly, we see some abuse by intimate partners. So we always have to look at who is taking care of the person and what is their motive in this neglect. So prevention and intervention strategies are very important, and we need to take the cultural differences into account with that as well. As they find, another thing that puts a older person at risk is that elder abuse is it forms from the longer ongoing relationship between the abuser and the abused. So the longer the relationship is, the more likely, the longer the abuse is in the relationship, the more likely that you're going to see that neglect, which makes sense, right? It's going to manifest physically and health-wise. So again, if you suspect that an older adult is a victim of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, you need to, report it. So let's move on to the last section of this lecture, Social Security and Medicare, right? So we talked a little bit about what are your social programs that you think about now, and then use a school, financial aid. Well, for the older adult, now you're going to go to Social Security and Medicare. So what are those things? They're government-funded retirement programs and healthcare plans that benefit older people. So let's think about the history. So the most important societal changes in the United States regarding older adults during the 20th century were the creation of retirement income plans such as Social Security and other pension plans, as well as the universal basic health care plans such as Medicare. And there are similar programs in other developed countries as well. So even though the cost of such programs continue to rise dramatically, $1.2 trillion expected to be spent on Social Security and Medicare in 2015, and can't imagine what it is in 2020. Social Security and Medicare are so strongly supported that elected officials are often afraid to discuss and implement much needed reforms. Very hot topic, right? So it differs between the voting population. What are your important to you is not important to a 70-year-old. So, they're going to care about Social Security and Medicare where you may be caring about the cost of college. So it's a hot topic in legislation. So these programs have reduced the number of older adults who live below the poverty line. But the projection indicates that baby boomers and Generation X members will have lower incomes in old age due to the fundamental changes in the pension availability and lower saving rates. So basically, we may run out of money and may not be able to pay as much out. And most people don't save as much right now, and pensions are going by the wayside. Like my dad works at the fire department and he has a pension. Companies just don't offer pensions anymore. And what pension does is it just guarantees your salary for the rest of your life. It's not like paying into a 401k where it's determined by how much you pay into. A pension is determined by how long you work. Well, those are going away and people are saving less. So what people have when they get in this age is going to be less. So economists often argue that older adults need 200% of the federal poverty limit to make ends meet. That's insane. And they especially need it in respect to healthcare costs. And by this measure, that puts women and minorities especially at risk financially. So the question is, will the U.S. government be able to continue funding these programs as the population ages? It's one we're going to be discussing for years to come. So Social Security began in 1935 by Franklin D. Roosevelt. And it was a law which will give some measure of protection to the average citizen and his family against the loss of job and against poverty-ridden old age. Came about in the Depression. Thus, Social Security was originally intended to provide a supplemental to savings and other means of financial support. Over the years, revision to the original law has changed Social Security almost to the point that it now represents the primary source of financial support after retirement for most U.S. citizens, and only source for many. So its intention was to be supplemental, but now it's a primary for many. So how can the government support that, right? However, with the increasing number of workers included in their employer-sponsored retirement plans, such as a 401k, 403b, and 457 plans, as well as mutual funds and various types of individual retirement accounts, hopefully we'll be able to offset some of this lack of Social Security income. There's been a lot of pressure to reform Social Security so that we have enough in 50 years to pay everything. Because at the rate we're going now, it's going to be bankrupt. So what do you think? Should Social Security be the only form of retirement, or should the responsibility be shifted to the individual? So the primary challenge facing Social Security is this great population of aging baby boomers. So those ones that are over 65. We just do not have enough money to support them to live to 90, right? We're all living, there's more people living longer, and this system was not made to support all those people. So because Social Security is not a savings account, but is funded by current workers' payroll taxes, the amount of money each worker must pay depends on the ratio of the number of people paying Social Security taxes to the number of people collecting benefits. So right now, they've done the statistics that how many people paying in is not enough for how many people actually collecting benefits. And eventually, if we don't figure out a better solution, we're going to run out of money. When it was created, 150 workers were paying into the Social Security system for every person collecting benefits. By 2030, this ratio will be down to 2 workers paying in for every person collecting benefits. That's crazy. As research shown in 2014 points out, this shift sets the stage for generational conflict over scarce national financial resources between baby boomers and the millennials. So what do you guys think, you millennials? The chance of you having money, if it keeps going this way, is going to be nil. So what are we going to do? So despite numerous plans that have been proposed since the 70s to address this issue, Congress has not yet taken action to ensure long-term financial stability of the system. So it's something you guys should be thinking about now in your youth, because by the time you get old enough to retire, there won't be any money. So you need to pressure your legislature now and think about that. And like I said earlier, put money in your 401k as soon as you can. Take care of yourself so that you don't have to depend on the government, because you don't know what that's going to entail. If it keeps up with the statistics, it won't be any money. So Medicare is the universal health plan for older adults over 65. And roughly 50 million U.S. citizens depend on Medicare for their medical insurance. So it's a huge population who take advantage of this, which makes it a huge cost for the government. So the most common ways to become eligible for Medicare is to meet these criteria. You are age 65 or older. You are a U.S. citizen or a permanent legal resident. And you or your spouse has worked long enough to be eligible for Social Security or railroad benefits, usually having earned 40 credits from about 10 years of work, so about 10 years of work, even if you are not yet receiving benefits. Or you or your spouse is a government employee or retiree who is not paid into Social Security but has paid Medicare payroll taxes while working. And Medicare consists of 4 parts. So Part A, which we consider the hospital. So all you health professionals are going to have to understand this. So Part A is inpatient hospital services, and that covers inpatient hospital, skilled nursing, home health, and hospice. So all those services. Part B, which covers the cost of physician services, outpatient, medical equipment, and supplies, and other health services and supplies. And you can have your benefits maxed out in these areas, in Part B especially. Part D, which provides for your prescription, and Part C, also called Medicare Advantage, is offered by private companies approved by Medicare. And it includes all the benefits of A and B as well as additional coverage like vision and dental. So as a healthcare professional, it's important to understand the parts of Medicare. So when you think of Part A, you're thinking about hospital, skilled nursing, home health. B is outpatient physicians, outpatient PT, all the things that you have to pay for services, all those tests and procedures and equipment outpatient. And D, you think of as prescription. And C is those extra things that you're losing when you lose your insurance, dental and vision. So just like Social Security, Medicare is funded by a payroll tax. So if you look at your check, you can see how much they take out for Social Security, and you can also see how much they take out by Medicare. So it faces the same problem as Social Security. As the years go on, there's going to be less people paying taxes and more people taking money out of the system. So if this continues to go on, it can actually, Medicare could go bankrupt. So it's one of the dilemmas that Congress is facing. So there's been controversy of Medicare, right? One of these is because Medicare costs have increased dramatically as a result of the rapidly increasing cost of healthcare. Cost containment of healthcare remains a major political concern and been debated, in every presidential campaign, right? Healthcare reform is huge in the United States. So we had the big healthcare reform of Obamacare. Many of you may even have Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, right? Been a controversy. Should you have to be taxed on it if you don't take it? Lots of different controversies on that. Also, because Medicare is a government-run health care program, it continues to be controversial, like we talked about. But one of the major differences between Medicare and Social Security is that Medicare has already been subjected to significant cuts in expenditures, typically through reduced payouts to healthcare providers. So I can tell you from experience, if you have a private insurance and you have Medicare, Medicare is going to pay fractions on what that private, maybe 20% on what a private would pay 80%. That's the way Medicare is saving money. So as a healthcare worker, it should be your concern. You have both things to look at. You want to have good jobs, and you want healthcare employees to be paid a good rate, but also you want to have affordable healthcare insurance. So how do you have both? Another thing, we talked about that affordable care, but President Obama proposed reductions to the Medicare Advantage Part C program, and that's that dental and vision part, right, in his budget as a part of his overall strategy to control the increase in health care costs. So, how is this going to play out in years to come? So it's clearly a political and social issue. And we've seen the implementation of the Patient Protection and Affordable Act in 2014, which has lowered the growth of some costs in Medicare. But again, like I said, that dilemma is also resulted in reduction in reimbursement to healthcare providers. So taken together, the challenges facing society concerning older adults' financial security and health, it'll continue to be a major political issue throughout the first decades of the 21st century. There's no easy answers, and we're going to argue it to death, but we need to come up with some workable solutions. Can we do that? I don't know. So now it ends chapter 15, and I want you to think about that person again, that older gentleman or female that you know in your life that you're picturing. Think about all the things that they have to deal with, the support. Are they aging successfully? Are they healthy? Are they have social interaction? Do they have a social convoy? Are they financially secure? Are they living at home? Are they in an assisted living? Do they need a long-term care? Have they lost their spouse? What are those factors? What did they look at? Think of this chapter through that person, and it'll help you remember the key factors here. Think of that person when you're taking the test. Picture them as you make those decisions, and think about what that person is facing. That's the end of this lecture. Hope you have a great week. And the last chapter, we're almost there to the end of the semester. It's going to be about those final months and that process of dying. Everybody have a great week and take care. See ya.